Nobody likes to pay for anything. And, no consumer will walk through the street saying, oh, what a wonderful digital payment experience I just had. Bad payments don't just lose you a transaction. They don't just lose you a chance to make some revenue. They're actually a huge brand risk for every merchant. I think to be in tech and to enjoy the pace of tech and the change of tech, you have to kind of be willing to work in that unknown. And you remember the promises of the internet was that this will kill all retail, it will kill all shopping.
This week, we're joined by Rory O'Neill, the CMO at checkout.com. We'll find out what drew Rory to the world of payments and the work he's now doing at Checkout to change the way the world shops.
There's always a great unknown in tech, and one can be afraid of the great unknown, or you could be afraid of how things are going to be deployed or not be deployed. More risk means more compliance, and then more challenges for the payment industry too.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Money Travels, presented by Visa, where we explore the extraordinary innovations in digital finance, transforming lives and livelihoods everywhere. I'm Rich.
I'm Max. Rory, welcome to the show.
Max, Rich, thanks for the invitation. Great to talk to you.
So, Rory, it's great to have you on and great to have someone like Checkout on the show. But Max has been dying to have this conversation and not just because of Checkout, because you two did used to work with each other. But maybe talk about kind of that, but also just a little bit about your background.
So working with Max was the highlight of my career, Rich. I mean, it's obviously, Max, it was the only line Max insisted I put into the script.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'll send the payment.
We can arrange that, Max, for sure. But there's, but look, I think I've been fortunate to be in technology for probably too many years, maybe more than 25 these days in tech. I've always been in tech, either software or those kind of pieces. Around the year 2000, it was obvious to me that the world was going to go mobile. So I spent ages trying to get into mobile. I was fortunate enough to work at BlackBerry. BlackBerry was a great ride. I think it was a great growth organization. I learned so much at BlackBerry. But then was fortunate to work with Max at Samsung. And we had part of a European team that was trying to elevate Samsung's brand and product against some incredible competition. We learned a lot and we won a couple of times, Max, maybe is the right way to say that. And one of the last projects we worked on together was actually bringing Samsung Pay to markets into Europe. And I remember at the time, Max, that there was, it was a highly disruptive thing that Tom was introducing Samsung Pay into Europe. And introducing Samsung Pay honestly felt like the mobile industry right at the start of the year 2000. Right, it was so obvious that payments was going to, go to our phones. It was going to be revolutionized. All of the difficult, frictionful interactions that we were having in the sort of, e-commerce space were going to be revolutionized by the things that were revolutionizing everything we did in mobile, in that sort of sense. So it felt like a very similar moment in time when payments were going on mobile. And I think that sort of digital revolution drew me to the industry. I didn't know much about payments at all, I'll be really honest. I think it's a staggeringly interesting space. I think that if you think about it, most businesses exist to do the minimum of two things. First is that they'll make something, they'll produce something, they'll have knowledge or intelligence, and they'll effectively go to market with those services or those products. And the second thing every business needs to do is take a payment. And without taking a payment, you don't get to revenue. And if you don't get to revenue, you don't get to profit. And if you don't get to profit, you don't get to cash, which is definitely what all businesses have to get to at some point in time. So I think that those two things sort of like coalesced for me. There was just so much tech going into how you do payments on phones and in digital space. And then I think the sort of curiosity that I had that actually payments were a lot more interesting than I thought they were. So I left Samsung to join the payments industry at a company called Planet. Worked with Planet for 5 years or so, trying to solve some niche areas of payments, and then was very fortunate to work at Checkout to try and how to bring some of the solves to the digital payment challenge that we're seeing in the world today, that will only get disrupted as we think about how the digital economy will rely on agentic commerce going forward and all those sort of pieces thrown into the mix. So yeah, very fortunate to be on that track, and obviously the highlight was working with Max, Rich. I mean, it's really clear.
So I now know why Max was so keen to have you on, because you're one of the few people who talk so highly about your experience working with him. But
yeah, just on that, Rory, you talk about tech, but is it tech only? Tech is a component, but is it tech only?
No, I think it is. It's definitely not. I think that payments is this amazing sort of space where you've got everything that's going on in tech, right? Like all the great tech innovations, with the possible exceptions of robotics and drones, we haven't quite got there yet, Max, but like everything else, AI, machine learning, data science, all the kind of quantum computing that's out there in tech, any great trend in tech is happening in payments for sure. But it's not just that, because you also sit in a world where there's incredible regulation, and there needs to be, because regulation builds trust. And there's this great relationship, particularly in fintech, between, the regulation that is there to create trust and the tech that is there to disrupt it and create more simplicity. So you've got that going on as well. And you've also got this brilliant sort of touch point with customer experience. Because, for the merchants we're so happy to serve, anyone from, eBay to Klarna, they go on stage when somebody is ready to click the payment button. And that journey, that consumer experience, how you fully integrate that so that it's not a clunky, whirring little sort of, time capsule in a web page or in an app. That's right at the epicenter of when brands need to think most about their customer experience. So it's at least those three things, right? It's tech plus regulation plus the ultimate customer experience that you're trying to drive. And all of that, I think, coming together is why I talk to many graduates, like if they're at universities, like get into payments, because there's very few spaces where all of those things coexist, basically.
Maybe for people not in the industry, give us a bit of background into the the rise of e-commerce and what happened to kind of create this space for checkout.
Yeah, I think the emergence of e-commerce and how it's fantastically changed how people do all sorts of things is amazing. And obviously the challenge for payments in the e-commerce space is I guess super simple, really, in the fact that when you present your card in a store and physically remove the goods from the store, there's a lot of trust in the system. And payments are usually accepted, 99.99% of the time when you're in that paradigm. When you take the same card and you interact with the same merchant and you buy the same goods and services online or through any aspect of e-commerce, there's more fraud, there's more risk, there's a need for greater compliance, and actually, quite frankly, there's less trust in the system. So the battle for every merchant that's doing e-commerce is how do they optimize payment acceptance, i.e. the payment goes through as often as it can do, but how do they mitigate the rules around risk and fraud? So, when you're 99.9% in-person payments, sometimes that can drop to 80% when you're online, which to major brands across the world, that dip in acceptance rate is a real business problem. So what Checkout does is exist to throw as much tech, as much machine learning, as much AI as we possibly can to increase the payment acceptance rates in that online or digital paradigm. Because let's be honest, like the digital paradigm is now really transforming the in-person paradigm, and there's more digital tech in the in-person paradigm. So we're going to need the acceptance rates to be just as good, is effectively the problem we're solving.
So just going back on what drew you into this world, what excited you about this world, did you walk into this with like an understanding of just how complex this would be, especially when you talk about not just the rise of e-commerce, but global e-commerce? How much was your mind kind of blown by the size of the opportunity, but just the scale of the challenge that not just you guys were facing, but obviously your customers and the merchants were facing?
100%. Payments is a $3 trillion market by 2030. It's a huge market in the sort of the complexity that it's and sort of country that it drives. But look, it's exactly that. I think that great e-commerce is about taking people's money in the way that they want to part with it when they're ready to part with it. And I think that taking the right payment method is just often great retailing, and presenting the right payment method is great retailing. It makes me giggle that sometimes the payment industry, obviously with our fascination for three-letter acronyms, we create things like APMs or alternate payment methods. And obviously it's been well noticed that if you're in China, WeChat Pay and Alipay are not alternate payment methods. They're just the payment methods, right? In that sort of sense. So obviously as things change, and we've seen, the rise of Pix in Brazil and those sort of pieces, but effectively people need to feel safe and secure and trusted to exchange payment methods. And that's one challenge for any network. The second is then ultimately, and this is a great belief of the founder of Checkout, Guillaume, is that all payments are effectively local. And even though you're, moving money around the world, ultimately it goes to a person or an entity in a local jurisdiction. And the rules and the regulations around that changes as you go to that local entity. So great payment networks have to think about payment methods, but they then also have to think about the different countries where you're moving those payment methods. And I think that the banking infrastructure that sits around that, let's be honest, in too many parts of the world, it's still built for physical money exchange through banks. And that, we shouldn't in 2025 be limited and constructed by operations of banking systems that only power things Monday to Friday, 9 through 5. Or only power things in certain currencies, right? Clearly that's something that's going to have to be broken down in time. So I think, amazing, incredible opportunity, amazing, incredible complexity, but actually, breaking down those things into much more simplistic journeys for our customers is, I think, what inspires a lot of people at Checkout, Rich, to be honest.
Following what you just said, is it the reason why, because today Checkout is in some countries, but you're not everywhere because you need to tailor your solution, your acceptance probably market by market, currency by currency?
Yeah, I think it's mainly that, Max. To be honest, I mean, I think Checkout's in 55 countries around the world today, and I think we've got a business model, and many have in the payment industry, to be fair, but we've got a business model that will follow our merchants. So we'll look at countries to go into based on the requirements of the merchants that we serve. And look, I'll quote my favorite general counsel in the payments industry, Emily Mathew, who's the general counsel of checkout.com. She said the only thing that's dead known to be true in the payment industry is that there will always be more regulation. And she's right. So look, we go very carefully into new countries. So, we announced last year that we're going into Brazil with a year-long effort to get into Brazil in the right way. Recently entered Canada, recently entered Japan. There are more markets on the horizon, but it's really, it takes a deliberate plan way beyond the technology, right? Of just having the technology of the network, and making sure that we sort of follow that sort of map into new countries so we can scale and grow in the right way. Really important for us to have local operations, Max. There's a person behind a payment. Like when things go wrong, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that we're purely focused on payments. We train 2,000 people worldwide on payments knowledge every year, so that every person in this company is learning payments, and it's really important that that's local too. So all of those things go together to define a very deliberate roadmap of where we enter and where we go into.
Hey, that's fascinating, and I love what you said. There is always a human behind every payment. And the operation in country is very important, because I think we tend to forget that. We feel like, this is flawless and this is easy to do, but there is a very robust and complex infrastructure behind the scene to make that work. So the customer payments is seamless, right?
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think there's the reality is that we have to be there when things go wrong, and it's important that we help people through that. So look, I mean, as much as there's AI, data science. There will be more as we get into agentic commerce, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But it'd be very interesting in payments to see where agents are deployed and where AI can be deployed to optimize things, and then where humans are going to still be needed. And by the way, I think that's probably a general comment on Gen AI in many aspects of life, right? Like we're going to automate the pieces that we probably don't like to do, and we're going to realize exactly where humans are needed in the system to add value and add creativity, for sure.
From a marketer's point of view, where do you focus most of the messaging from Checkout? Because ultimately, as I see it, you solve two problems. You solve one problem for the end user who wants to be able to pay the way they want to pay, and then also you solve the issue for the merchant in terms of acceptance, so they can expand their kind of user base, etc. Where do you focus from a marketing point of view? Because you're probably asked to focus everywhere, but you have limited resources, I'm sure, like Max always complains about. So what is it that what approach do you take when it comes to actually sending the message of Checkout?
I to have the resources and creativity of Max. We're very envious on this side of the table. But look, I think it's a really interesting question, actually. I mean, we've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I think that we've got great competitors in the space, right? Like I think we've got companies that do amazing things. So we have to get Checkout more known, right? Like it's a very simple conversation that like if more buyers know who Checkout is before they start their journey, we'll ultimately be more successful in our conversions and our pipeline and as our business grows. So we do have to tell the story of Checkout and where we focus to the wider world. I think the bit that we're leaning into is that what we want to try and get across is that we're a brand, a digital brand of performance. and that if you work with checkout, then you're definitely going to get access to expertise in digital payments. And that should translate into better acceptance rates, and then effectively better business and better competitive advantage really for our customers. So the way that we elect to tell that story, like many performance brands, is actually work with our merchants and work with our customers. So in a recent campaign here we ran in the UK with ASOS, Deliveroo, FreeNow, and Fever, we were keen to highlight what they're doing actually, and how they serve their consumers, and that checkout is almost this invisible engine that sits behind them, helping them do the great things that they do as they perform. So for us, we're pretty convinced that nobody likes to pay for anything, especially Max. But particularly nobody likes to pay for anything. And, no consumer will walk through the street saying, oh, what a wonderful digital payment experience I just had. No one will ever say that. And I think that the payment industry talks a lot about the payments industry, but nobody actually likes to pay. That's the kind of beautiful tension or creative tension that we can kind of lean into. So for us, our advertising is all about our merchants, the fact that nobody should know who we are. We might be trusted by billions, but known by absolutely no one. And our whole piece is that we've got this great, infrastructure that sits behind merchants that, quite simply, we're where the world checks out. And for us, our world is very digital. So we kind of lean into that pretty heavily, Rich. But it's kind of funny to get to a creative place where you start wanting to buy advertising based on being invisible, right? Like when checkout's really, really good, we're 100% invisible.
I do know some product people who do love a good kind of digital payment experience, and they talk about it a lot. But probably that's the niche of people.
That's your next podcast invite.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's really interesting what you said, because you talk about, you could be the most successful company that nobody's ever heard of, right? That's kind of that invisibility kind of layer. Yet what you said about, from a consumer's checkout experience, the trust in that brand is just so important, because this is all about keeping people's money safe.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing with especially some of the larger merchants, that trust probably comes from the merchant's brand themselves. Yet when you're dealing with smaller merchants, just how important is that trust from a consumer's point of view, that it's maybe a slightly less known merchant, and who is this kind of checkout company that I've got on my screen?
It's everything in payments, because and actually probably even bigger, right? I mean, trust is such an important thing, and I think that kudos to Visa for all the investments it's made over the years to build global consumer trust in the brand. It's an amazing thing to build up. So I think that, and it takes a long time, right? In that sort of sense. But from studies that we've done, over 60% of consumers will not return to a site if they have a bad payment experience. So bad payments don't just lose you a transaction. They don't just lose you a chance to make some revenue. They're actually a huge brand risk for every merchant, irrespective of the size, Rich, right? I mean, and we know that shoppers will not go back to websites where they see that endless little sort of hourglass spinning, and they're worried about whether their money's gone through or not. It's one of those sharp intake of breath moments, right? Did that actually go through? Am I going to wait for the email to see if I actually paid for something? And people don't like that, right? It needs to be much more seamless these days. So I think that it's a brand risk, right? It's not just a revenue risk, but a bad payment is a brand risk from that perspective, and that goes across irrespective of the size of the merchant, because very, very few will deliver their own payment experience. But and we also know it's only going to increase, right? Because ironically, when we study patterns in trust, we look at how it varies per country, and we look at how trust varies per generation. I think Visa have some amazing statistics on this too, but we know that Generation Z is, much more likely to be victims of fraud, because they feel that they're always safe online. They have huge trust in the internet, because it's all they've ever experienced. So more risk means more compliance, and then more challenges for the payment industry too. So lots of different worldwide perspectives on consumers' trust, but that hanging hourglass, if you like, can really impact merchant brand. So it's super important.
Before we dive into the generational differences and regional differences, I wanted to go back to invisibility. What is good invisibility? How do you describe what good invisibility is?
It's a great question. It's like we always, that's definitely our marketing challenge, Max. Is like, how do you show people invisible, right? Like it's not
It's such a marketeer to marketeer question.
Yeah, no, it's great. We've thought of lots of things, Rich, that we'll save for another time. But it's I think that candidly, some of the best marketing we can do is the word of mouth from our own merchants. So we study, as you'd expect, customer satisfaction. We study Net Promoter Score. Back in the early days of mobile, Max, you'll remember how successful BlackBerry was with word of mouth. And I think I'm right in that there was only one marketing tactic that Apple actually copied from BlackBerry, which was sent from my BlackBerry wireless, which in effect was huge word of mouth, right? But I'm pretty sure about that. But anyway, nonetheless, word of mouth matters. So payments people trust payments people. Merchants talking that they've had a great experience with checkout, acceptance rates are increasing, service levels are high, innovation rates are really good is the best marketing we can do. So having our merchants talk about how invisible we are, Max, is probably the best marketing tactic we've got.
Love it. So on the generational side of it, what are the big differences you see?
Yeah, I think there's some great behavioral pieces, both generationally and regionally. I think that we're fortunate enough now. Like if you take markets like the UK, we have probably 140 million cards, stored in our vault, which for a nation of 68 million people shows you how much we love cards, right? From that perspective. But look, we can see some really interesting trends, and I think there's pretty much every economy in the world, digital economy in the world. It's parents that are buying subscriptions on behalf of their children. And maybe that's, because of our sort of focus on security and safety, particularly here in Europe. In China, it's totally different. In China, it's, children between, 9 and 16 that buy subscriptions for their parents. So Max, you might want to think about moving to China, right? In terms of, lowering that weekly outcome that you've got there. But so that's, amazing sort of, generational differences. There's also wonderful regional differences too, right? And the fact that the UAE and KSA, they're some of the most digitally native markets. Digital adoption is yielding some incredible use cases. In terms of the erosion of cash and how the kind of internet is taking over. You've seen in China now, for example, when it comes to food delivery, most people will order from three food delivery apps at the same time, and then they'll cancel the two slowest. Right, and no one would have predicted that in terms of how comfortable we've become from it. But all that said, only 11% of global transactions are actually fully digital. So there's a huge amount of growth to come. And I think that as you see us, all generations now interacting in different places in more what I would say are quasi e-com experiences. When you go into quick service restaurants now, you are presented with a 21-inch screen and an unattended terminal. That's an e-commerce experience. Click and collect, click and ship, buy online, pick up in store, endless aisle. They're all they're more e-com experiences than they are in-person experiences. And you're seeing great disruption that the digital technology is disrupting all of that from a generational perspective and also from a regional perspective too.
And you mentioned there's some really good competitors in this space. But how do you see the kind of the industry when it comes to narrow focus, regionally focused kind of businesses, and someone like Checkout in what you said 55 countries that you're in? Where does that come out, and how does that impact kind of the customer experience? If you're saying you're just going into Brazil, there'll probably be some very hyper regionally focused businesses in certain areas that you go into. I'm just wondering how you think about kind of that in terms of that hyper regional focus versus a kind of broader global business.
Yeah, I think great question. I think I think part of Checkout's growth has come from its sort of refocusing its business on really sort of global enterprise merchants, Rich. And I think that we're delighted, as we said, to work with great brands across the world, and it's really that focus on digital and the fact that we don't do anything else, we just do digital, that is really interesting for some of those global brands and global merchants. So it's sort of kind of funny in a way that a promise of the payment industry for some time has been this single API, single platform, any currency, any payment method, any channel, anywhere in the world. And that's like almost like the Nirvana promise, or maybe overpromise of anyone in the payment space. And I remember talking to merchants even, in the last few years, is that everyone knows that it's not possible to find one vendor, and nor would you ever want to have one platform or one vendor to do that for you. Because when you're processing hundreds of millions of dollars online, that would be a really poor resilience decision, and that sort of sense. And actually what we want to do is get more and more companies that are smaller into a world where they can take better advantage from payment economics and actually have the best payment provider in the right channel for the right payment method in the right country, getting to the right payment acceptance rates for the right cost amount, is really what we want to try and get to. So we believe very strongly that our focus in digital and digital only means that every single person in our company is focused on just that one challenge. And ergo, over time, we should have more investments, more advances in technology, more use of AI, more use of machine learning, more use of data, so that our network, that is our payments network, that is only focused on digital, actually delivers a better performance for our customers. So over time, we're betting that focus really drives our growth. And that's, I think, you'll see in Checkout's recent growth that we're, growing at 45% year on year, is because of that focus, right? And that proposition of solving digital acceptance rates across the globe for some of the world's leading brands is really what's driving the growth, I think.
I think it's a really interesting point as well around, this isn't just about the technology, it's about the people that you're hiring to that space who are driven by one kind of single mission. And, that focus is super important for, a purpose-driven business.
You're right. I think part of the post-COVID world, which we can definitely talk about now that it's at least 5 years ago, right, is almost recontracting with all employees about, what's required in an organization, what the purpose of the organization is, and what that culture really needs to be. And I think, kudos to the Checkout team over the last 3 years for getting the clarity of expectation around what's needed from a talent perspective, the expertise in the business around payments. And look, no one's born with payments knowledge. I don't think there's a payments class at university yet, although we're working on it. We've got a deep partnership with the MRC where we sponsor the education courses for fraud and for payments, so that more payments professionals are created around the world. But at the end of the day, payments takes a certain type of person, because you have to have curiosity to learn the topic. And I think that's really, really important when you think about that talent equation and the talent that you need, as you say, Rich, globally to operate this, global payments network, but do it with local people and local talent in the markets that you choose to enter.
There was a bit of a giggle when we talked about a payments class in university, but actually, some of the topics that we cover on here are around kind of financial literacy. And I think, in terms of the financial literacy levels around the world, certainly from the UK, with 3 young kids, myself, going through that curriculum, there's nothing on there. And how closely linked payments are to financial literacy, I think, we could take that smirk into something in a real effort to say, it makes the world go round. So people should learn about it from an early age and understand not just the options that are out there, but the implications of those options as well.
I 100% agree. I think, look, I'll show my age now, Rich, and I can tell you that when I registered for university, we had to leave a deposit check. And I can tell you that the number of students of my age who did not know how to write a check when they were standing in the university queue at that age, and I'm not going to give you the year, but it was very clear that was there was not enough core literacy on how things actually had to work. And I'm not sure we've moved on that much, disappointingly.
I want to ask you the question around what you do with MRC. Very interested to understand what is Checkout doing in this field, and how do you, what's the angle, and probably what are the results already? What are the outputs of this work?
Yeah, so we've got a long-term relationship with MRC, long-term partnership, Max, with MRC. Julie, the CEO of MRC, is helping us greatly as to the role of a payment vendor in that community. I think it's a very special community, actually. And of all the, as you imagine, we spend a lot of time with our customers asking them which events they go to, why do they go to those events, are they attending the sort of big industry trade shows? If they are, why are they going there? And I actually went to my first MRC in Vegas earlier this year. And I can tell you that it's a pretty special community. You've got the leading lights in payments. spending time actually interrogating each other and solving problems or looking at opportunities from each other, which is a pretty special community, I think, in that sense. So we sort of realized that pretty quickly with Julie. And one of the things that the team needed was, effectively sponsorship of the training courses. That, if you want to be, getting to be chartered and really sort of understanding the space, there's great courses, great classes from that community. So we thought it was a pretty, no-brainer investment for us to actually sponsor those training courses. And if you're a member of the MRC, you get access to payment essentials, you get access to fraud essentials, and it's sponsored by checkout.com. And we're doing that over a multi-year period, because we believe that, good payments start with good education. And I think that investing in that community, building and celebrating payment professionals is the way to do so. And then we want to push it even further, Max, as you'd imagine, right? Is that, we want to ask the question, why isn't there a chief payments officer? Why doesn't every company have a chief payments officer, right? If one of the two things we said that every company has to do is take a payment, then why isn't it a seat at the board? Right? Like, the payment experience impacts brand, it impacts the merchant relationship, it impacts consumer dynamics, it can help you with technology. Like, why isn't there a CPO at every company of a certain size in this world? And maybe if we get more chief payment officers, then maybe we will get, university classes and vocational courses that build and grow that career, because obviously we'd be pretty excited about it, but we think it's got a huge role to play in modern business. And it's super interesting if you see some of the really big accounts that we work with, the likes of eBay and those sort of brands. It's really interesting to see where payments sits in the organization. Does it sit in the sort of payments world, in finance somewhere buried in the organization? Or actually is it up leveled to be part of the product experience, or even more to be part of the consumer experience? And is it in the CX teams? Is it in the product innovation groups? And are people thinking about payments as a much more strategic tool for growth rather than a utility and a cost that has to be performed? And it's just interesting to see the reactions there, because obviously, you can get payments being thought about at the end of any customer journey because it's the last thing that kind of happens. But actually it's the bit with all the regulation, all the compliance, all the difficulty, all the constraints is right at the end. And often actually you have to think about those bits first before you even think about your end-to-end software experience. From that perspective, think about the stuff with all the constraints first is kind of where we get to. So look, I think we've got a great relationship with MRC. I think it's a fabulous community. And we hope that by investing in their education courses, there's more and more chief payment officers, and we'll see it as a title as we go through.
But isn't it also the education of the rest of the C-level? Like, to your point, today, it probably sits more with the CFOs, or the finance department overall. Is the education also to the C-level of the importance of payments, and not just the future CPOs or whatever title they're going to take?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that when we asked our customer advisory board last summer, before we worked with the MRC team, what was their biggest challenge in raising the profile of payments in their organizations. And it wasn't raising the education and the training of their teams. It wasn't raising the education and the training of themselves. But it was actually the level of understanding of payments in the rest of the C-suite. And again, the common perception is that it's seen as a utility, it's seen as a commodity, it's not seen as a differentiator. But look, now that 82% of people now shop online, you've got 37% of millennials or Gen Zs checking their phones for online deals. It's going to become more and more important. And it's time that it kind of got a much more strategic discussion or strategic narrative at the table, irrespective of whether that comes from the CFO or CPO. You're quite right, Max, with a push, but it's got to be at the board table for discussion.
I completely agree on the CPO. I think not a however, but the parallel to that is people like checkout.com are almost a contracted CPO at the moment. Right, and that's what's setting the really good kind of payments companies. Isn't just the product; it is that kind of sage advice that they're talking to these businesses. I'm guessing your pitch, both institutions and customers, is they don't have that knowledge. So it actually creates this opportunity And this is where we see ourselves as well, right? So people with deep payments and ecosystem knowledge. And I think if you look at the companies that have really risen to the top in this space, isn't just the great products and services they have, it's the knowledge and that consultative process that they sell alongside that. So don't do yourselves out of a job just yet.
Look, I think that's right. And I think there's, if we turn it into the sort of questions we get these days, I mean, Visa's, obviously with its investments in intelligent commerce is helping the world figure out and solve where agentic commerce may go to. I mean, some of the questions that presents for brands are really interesting, above and beyond the payment part of it, right? Because, obviously one of the things we have to solve quickly is putting the trust back in the system again when people shop on your behalf. And I think that, obviously that's very important, but it also raises amazing questions about people's websites. If Google's right and the checkout page goes away, what happens, right? Like, what happens to those sort of pieces? If agents start representing us, and perhaps when they find, the parameters that we set inside of the agent, perhaps things like, words on a web page will be less interesting, or pictures on a web page will be less interesting. It'll be much more about the basics of e-commerce, which is SKU availability, product availability, pricing, and shipping dates. Maybe the old-fashioned things that were important in e-commerce will become more important as agents start shopping on our behalf, right? And in those sort of senses. So look, I think the great thing is it's not a static place, and I think that expertise is something that merchants that we speak to actually obviously really benefit from or realize is important. And as the tech changes, you still need that expertise. So it has to stay on top for sure.
It's quite a good lean into agentic commerce, and it'd be really interesting from a marketer's perspective how you view what has traditionally been for a lot of companies, an advantage in kind of UX, customer experience, and how you maximize that. How you view customer experience versus a phrase I coined about half an hour ago with Max before this call, of like robot experience.
God, yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of components there, Rich. I think the first is to work with the community to make sure that trust is retained in the system. And again, kudos to the Visa team for some of their recent announcements on those that like give people trust in the system, because that exchange, that network has to be protected, right? And again, like way back in the day when we paid for things with cash, there was a big uplift to make sure that there was trust in the system when you used a card. When the card was then used online, there had to be trust in the system, and things like PSD2 and all those kind of things build trust into that. And we'll have to do the same in the agentic commerce world. So I think the industry has to get together and work together to make sure that there is trust in the minds of the consumer, because without trust, it's not just payments that fail, it's the economy at large and commerce at large fails. So that's kind of, I think, point one. And then I think the second one is working through the likely scenarios. I mean, it's funny, I was reading something from Benedict Evans, over the weekend, and all the things that were said about the internet 30 years ago. And there was amazing claims, right? You get claims that were like, well, the internet will reduce the amount we travel because everyone will communicate online. And there was these grandiose statements about the internet, many of which didn't come true, but many did. But it did take 30 years. And that the paradigm shift of technology will tend to do so. So I think with agentic commerce, we're exploring, we're understanding use cases. Is it really known yet how it's going to disrupt things? No, I don't think it is. But I think particularly in the agentic commerce world, I think we have to build the mechanisms now that allow people to explore those flows and explore those use cases. But it will have dramatic implications on how we stream, scroll, search, and shop on the internet. There's amazing numbers about how much traditional search is being disrupted by Gen AI. So if people are looking for things and searching for things in different ways and different tools, that has implications for brands. The consumer journey we've spoken about already is kind of going to change fundamentally. So I think it's at least those two aspects, Rich. I think there's like number one is how do we get trust in the system so that people and consumers particularly can trust that model of commerce. And then secondly, allow the tools and allow people to explore these things and understand the ramifications of what they have. And I think that's broader than just one vendor. I think that's an industry thing we have to work on, I think.
Do you think it's just another piece of kryptonite into kind of the importance of payments? And you talked about invisible payments and just how invisibly incredibly impressive that experience is, because it's humans are probably more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt once or twice.
Yeah.
But will robots do that, or are they just going to go down the happiest path they can see?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think what we obviously know to be true is that whether it's agentic, robotic, or human led, there's always going to have to be a payment. And that infrastructure that, as we talked about right at the beginning, that global payment network that knows people's identity, knows the parameters of which they can shop, knows how to optimize the payment acceptance rates, knows how to manage compliance, risk, and fraud. Like whatever the use case, there has to be that global payment network that sits underneath that is responsible for managing the trust and the identity and the payment so that money can flow. And however that's driven, that's always going to have to be there. And perhaps, you'll probably be in a place where, totally speculative, but the apparatus that you use to connect to the internet, probably your phone. If Max and I had our way, probably your phone is going to need to know your identity. Is the agent going to need to know your identity? Are the software layers going to need to know your identity? Are the merchant going to need to know your identity? Not entirely sure, but the payment network is definitely going to have to do it. And the payment network, of course, is made up of payment providers like Checkout, working with Visa, of course, is the network is going to have to know the identity and trust system. So it'd be interesting to see how that evolves, but that feels like it's the known thing, that the identity and trust has to be in the network.
And I think again it goes back to the literacy, like that becomes even more important now, in terms of a basic understanding of the flow of kind of payments, for especially if you've got a third party doing this on your behalf now.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And I think that we had a bit of fun with it at one of our recent customer conferences, where we sort of used Gen AI to create a fake identity of me. We created like 30 different personas in 5 minutes. Some of them were way more interesting than I was, Rich, to be quite honest. But I think that so with all
which version is on this podcast, by the way? Is this,
no comment.
How can we test? Yeah.
No comment. But it certainly wasn't the Muppet version, that's for sure. But look, I think all those questions are raised, right? And again, it goes back to where we're getting to, is that there's so many different parameters around that sort of how the transactions will change, what are the implications around risk and fraud, and again we go back to the same thing. It's like identity and digital identity will become more important. And then, because that's what's going to be required to make sure that there's trust in the system. And it's amazing to see, different national views on, who thinks digital identity will be part of the future. When we talk about, the UAE and KSA earlier, there's a very high percentage in that region where they think digital identity will be the future of payments. In the UK, surprise, surprise, it's a lot less. We're a bit more skeptical about the role of digital identity and the way it's going to play in payments. So yeah, big, super big topics that the industry has to crack for sure.
But is it the role of digital identity, or is it, back to your point on trust? Is it about trusting the system with our most personal informations?
No, I think it is trust. I think the whole purpose of digital identity is to build trust. I think it's we've recently done a bit of work we call the Trust Index, Max, which we put out there and put online for merchants to look at, and we've found two things really. One is that the trust in the digital economy and the growth of the digital economy is actually fueling national GDP. I mean, it's become so important now that it's fueling national GDP, which is no surprise given that a fifth of our disposable income a fifth of all household income is actually spent in digital economy. So it's no wonder that it drives GDP really in that sort of sense. And then the second thing is that you're quite right. Like everything adds up to trust. And it doesn't matter whether it's digital or in person, but trust is the thing that always has to be there. And if it's not, then commerce itself slows down.
So that's the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge at the same time.
Yeah, 100%.
It's how do we build trust, and at the same time, how do we make sure we don't destroy the trust that we put in the system, right?
You talked about the role of, not just in payments, but the role of kind of humans and AI and artificial intelligence in society in general. I think is your role as kind of outsourced CPAO as well as CMO at Checkout. Like, how are you thinking about that in a kind of payments point of view? Where is the role of kind of where could you see the role of like pure artificial intelligence, and then layer on the importance of humans and real life people?
Yeah, great question. And we think about it all the time. Like, I think that, I think the core payment performance, so optimizing that payment acceptance rate between, different merchant different merchant references and different payment types and different countries and different payment methods with different issuers, with different data sets and different requirements over time. And it's not even a static field, Rich, right? That's highly dynamic. And, it always amazes me, like the team will say and show me, like, if with one issuer here in the UK, if you put your postcode in with lowercase, it's more likely to be rejected than if you put it in with uppercase, like, capital letters. And that's the type of thing that can disrupt a payment transaction across those different variables. So there's just so much application of AI to that, to kind of, optimize that is a really cool thing. I think the processes then that sit around that. So AML checks, fraud checks, KYC checks, the onboarding processes. We've invested in those greatly so that there's standard operating procedures for agents that can, automate those pieces and actually just deliver a better customer service and those sort of pieces. So there's the infrastructure around the payments that is really interesting. We obviously want to reserve humans for the pieces that, will touch customers the most. So whether that's on the merchant side of things, the merchant equation, we know that in-person reviews of our roadmap, we know that sitting down and building out joint roadmap plans, joint integration plans, joint technology plans with our customers around the world is a highly valuable task. I'm sure Max will say the same thing, that, there is nothing as joyous and as valuable to us as spending time with our customers when we take them to our events around the world. And as much as we talk about, being the digital payment provider, we're investing more these days in hospitality and customer engagement, in real in-life experiences with our customers, because that's where we know the human side of things is really, really important. Now, we'll do a bucket load of digital marketing too, and we'll target people on various channels. But, I'm sure we're not alone in saying that it's that human interaction that's highly valuable and will only ever get more valuable, actually, as time goes on.
At the same time, it's interesting when you think of agentic commerce moving on. Right, to the point you made earlier, you said there are three big things that are important. Technology, fraud and compliance, and then customer experience. So that customer experience you're talking about in this in-person event, etc. But at the same time, with robots doing a lot of those tasks for us moving forward, is it going to be really relevant, or is it just going to be like 0 to 1s to talking to 0 to 1s, and the CX component would be gone, will disappear?
Yeah,
because I don't think the robot will tell us, oh, this guy has a better customer experience, we should buy from those guys.
No, I think it's right. But I think the again, I'm no study of anthropology, but what I think is true is the human race will always do what the human race wants to do and likes to do. And you remember the promises of the internet was that this will kill all retail, it will kill all shopping. Actually, no. Right? If you look at the overall percentage of retail to overall commerce, and it's amazing that the Gen Zs, and I'm sure the Gen Alpha is the same, their preferred shopping channels physical retail, right? Because for certain goods, right? Because that's what they enjoy. So I think that if you can put joy in the system, human beings will do what they love to do. And again, wouldn't it be a great thing if agentic commerce actually delivers on all of the dreadful shopping experiences or searching experiences that we actually don't want to do, those irritable processes, if you like? Wouldn't it be great if they're removed and we can only actually do what we really enjoy doing, right? I mean, that's the positive lens on that question, Max, I think.
What are the other big opportunities you see that you're working on and that gives you hope for this, for the future?
Yeah, I think there's almost like near term and slightly longer term, and I'm not smart enough, Max, to tell you what near term is in real years terms or what mid term is in real term years, but it feels like near and mid term. I think that today there is still a lot of ground to cover on payment acceptance rates, processing the right digital payment methods in the right regions in the world, and getting those use cases right. And there's enormous amounts of value there. And we know that our investments in machine learning, we optimize over 60 million payment transactions a day with machine learning and AI to make sure that we can nudge just one basis point of payment acceptance delivers real economic value to our merchants. So there's an awful lot in getting that right. There's an awful lot in getting the right countries into the network, a lot of value in the payment methods in the right in the right network, the right countries in the right network as well. So I think that is near term how the industry is still competing, and that's the kind of like invisibility competition, if you like, getting that stuff right. I think the next phase is going to be driven by probably more immersive type use cases, whether that's agentic, whether that's fully embedded in software, whether that's embedded in sort of financial systems or financial processes, much of which has been widely talked about in our industry for some time. But I think that effectively removing the payment experience from the merchant and the consumer is probably where we'll compete in the future from those domains. So I think, lots of runway in making sure that we provide the best service levels, the right acceptance rates, we get the right amount of innovation in the countries that we bring on, the right amount of innovation in the payment methods today. And I think long term, I think we get payments so it's fully immersive, and it isn't that barrier constraint driven part of any consumer journey.
I think we've covered a lot of what keeps you excited about this industry. There's a lot of stuff to be terrified of when it comes to payments, because as we said, it's like the trust issue, the regulatory changes. So what kind of keeps you up at night, and then also what keeps you coming to work in this industry?
Yeah, I think it's probably best described by a lot of the roles I've had in tech along the way, Rich. Like, I think that there's always a great unknown in tech, and one can be afraid of the great unknown, or you could be afraid of how things are going to be deployed or not be deployed, right? I think that we know that things like near field communication, for example, was a tech looking for a use case for about 14 years before we figured out tap and go or tap and pay and those sort of things, right? So I think that I think to be in tech and to enjoy the pace of tech and the change of tech, you have to kind of be willing to work in that unknown. But every now and again, you have to check yourself, I think. And it was funny. I was chatting to some members of the team, and they were like, we were recently at South by Southwest in London, which was a great show celebrating creativity. And obviously it's first time in London. It was great to see a show like that back in London, or, trying for the first time to be in London. I'm pretty sure that, creativity isn't the monopoly of, other countries. I think London has a place to play in that for sure. So it was great to be at that event. But I think that there was lots of worrying talk about how AI would take people's jobs, or, please, get into the agent sort of economics. I think those are worrying statements for people. Sometimes people worry about those kind of things. And I just sort of went back to some of the things that were said about the internet in the early days, and they were untrue too. And actually, people that made the most out of the internet were the people that rolled with that uncertainty and just were curious enough to go figure out what it could do. And I think that I would always stay on that side of the equation, to be honest. But I would just encourage people to be as curious as they can be and go and find out about what that stuff does, because they'll get way more out of it and way more enjoyment out of it.
You're obviously based in London,
yeah.
And we've talked about the UAE, KSA having really rich kind of and super advanced kind of or digitally native economies. Yeah. If you could work somewhere else, there's somewhere where you say, I'd love to solve that problem regionally, where would you go?
Oh, wow. What a question. I think
I've put you on the spot there. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think there's definitely, I've spent a bit of time in UAE and KSA this year, and I was blown away by how digital it is and how forward thinking it is. I mean, it's wonderful. I won't get the title right, but there's a minister of, I think it's the first minister of Gen AI. It's a ministerial appointment in the UAE. And he also covers the digital economy and remote working policy. So it's amazing how that they've got a ministerial position on Gen AI and the digital economy. It's incredible. So I think that there's amazing things going on there. I think the US market is super interesting to check out. If I'm really honest, I couldn't not mention it. The US market is still the largest payment market in the world, and I think that Checkout's got a really good proposition there. So if I was encouraging any of my team to think about mobility, I'd get them to think about the US, because I think it's just incredible opportunity. And then I think as you go around the world, I think, Asia is always spectacularly interesting. I'm sure you guys find the same, right? I think that, there's still such vibrancy and dynamism and so much uniqueness in that region. And it's always baffles me as to, we talk about APAC, and then we try and find similarities between China, Japan, Korea, and all these other great markets, right? It's just It's ridiculous. Like, it's they're markets in themselves, in that sort of sense. So, gosh, but then if I can, Rich, I'm a huge advocate for London, and Checkout's very proud to call London home. There aren't many. We did better in fintech than we probably did in cloud computing and data processing. But I think the UK did pretty well in fintech, and we need to keep it and protect it, and we need to help it to grow. And back to our sort of central point, we need talent in the London space. We need brands to do really, really well in London, and we need to celebrate them. And we're very proud of London being our home, and proud to invest in the talent in and around London. So lots of places, but I'm still staying in London. How's that?
You're still staying put. Good answer.
You went around the world to go back to the UK. I like it.
Exactly. Story of my life, Matt. Story of my life.
So one last question. We like to ask our guests if there is anyone they would love to invite to this show, but also to learn from those people they would like to invite. So do you have one name, a couple of names of people you would love to see or would love to hear from in this show?
Well, look, other than the Money Travels podcast, I have an unhealthy addiction to Scott Galloway's work. So I have to declare that. So I would ask Scott Galloway to come on this show with you two. And look, I'd love to ask him lots of stuff about, fatherhood tech, how marketeers work in the modern world of economy. I'd love to ask him about how did he feel about his voice-only part in White Lotus. I'm sure that was amazing to have a voice-only part in White Lotus. But actually, I think the one question I'd ask him is, what did he last pay for? What did he last pay for online? That's what I'd love to ask Scott Galloway, because I've often wondered it.
Interesting. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, so we definitely need to make that happen.
Good guest. We need to reach out to the Minister for AI in UAE. I think that would be a really interesting kind of discussion.
Very cool.
Well, thank you very much, Rory. I appreciate the time today.
No, thank you both. Great to talk to you. Really cool.
We really enjoy talking to you. That is for Rich and I this week. To keep the conversation going, you can follow us on our LinkedIn. And of course, don't forget to follow our show wherever you listen or watch your podcast.
And if you enjoyed what you heard today, leave us a review, tell your friends, or better still, do both. We'll be back next episode to explore more life-changing innovations in digital finance. So wherever your travels take you, remember to join us then for the next installment of Money Travels presented by Visa.